People in our world may plea for tolerance or equality or trying to make people equal in a sense, due to the many divisions that may take place within the world, due to the fact that one group or another might feel oppressed. One might act as the victim, another might act as the oppressor. One may say that they should put themselves down, another might push themselves up and themselves on a pedestal. But the question is, what really is equality and what is inequality? Can we be able to see the idea of natural rights intertwined with equality, so that way it's not just based on pure emotion? If we don't see any one individual as qualified to be the slave master over another or a slave under another, where does that put every individual? Equality is the condition in which everyone has the same rights, i.e., it is the condition of which no slavery is present. Rights are sometimes said as birthrights, referring to the fact that people are born equal by their base nature of everyone sharing humanity. This would mean everybody should be respected as such, and not as slaves or slave masters. In other words, no one person can have any more or less rights than anyone else. People can only be kept away from exercising their own rights and freedom by others doing wrong to them, or by their own belief that they need permission from an authority in order to exercise a right. Many slaves in the 1800s had to obtain permission from their slave masters just to leave the plantation, go from plantation to plantation, or let alone do anything. With our understanding of equality, any action that is right is an action that promotes equality, for which the Golden Rule more obviously helps to portray in its reciprocal nature of application. If it is right for you to do, it is also right for another to do. And so in contrast with equality, inequality is known as the condition in which some people claim to have more rights than others. It is therefore a condition of which slavery is present. This would mean that rights are not respected as birthrights and are instead treated as privileges, assuming that some people have the right to grant and revoke others' rights, and assuming that those with this authority are more human or a special kind of human in order to do so. This creates a dynamic where those of less rights are not allowed to conduct actions that those of more rights could exercise. In other words, you require permission to be free from the master, and the most freedom is for the master. For chattel slavery in the past, the granting of freedom for the slaves was known as manumission or enfranchisement. William Lloyd Garrison, prominent abolitionist, said everyone should be treated fairly, no matter what they look like. Frederick Douglass, a former slave and abolitionist, said no man can put a chain about the ankle of his fellow man without at last finding the other end fastened about his own neck. Mahatma Gandhi, a prominent leader for Indian independence, said a slaveholder cannot hold a slave without putting himself or his deputy in the cage for holding the slave. You can notice the reciprocal nature here. Josiah Warren, another abolitionist, said, "I hardly know which of the two classes is most enslaved or most to be pitied, slaves or masters." Auburn Herbert said, "From the moment you possess power, you are but its slave, fast bound by its many tyrant necessities. The slave owner has no freedom. He can never be anything but a slave himself and share in the slavery that he makes for others. It is, I think, plain it must be so. Power once gained, you must anxiously day by day watch over its security, whatever its security costs, to prevent the slippery thing escaping from your hands." Rose Wilder Lane says the slavery owners were in process of destroying their own economy by maintaining slavery. That's why they could not win a military victory over the Northerners, and she's referring to the Civil War here. Natural resources were more abundant in the South than in the North, but wealth was progressively less in comparison because slavery inhibited the use of human energy in the South. So the Southerner was hampering the use of his own liberty by suppressing the slave's use of his. The increasingly indebted slave owner on his increasingly mortgaged property was unable to do much that he wanted to do, and the reason for his diminishing area of freedom was his denial of freedom to his slaves. More and more Southerners were seeing this fact and trying to get rid of their slaves. There were all kinds of plans for doing this. So many simply freed their slaves that most, if not all, Southern legislators passed acts forbidding this. Acts intended to compel slave owners to continue to bear their responsibility for their slave property, and to prevent an increase of the numbers of untrained, uncontrolled, unfed, and unsheltered persons at large in those states. To evade these laws, slave owners moved temporarily into free territory, freed their slaves there, and returned. So laws were passed forbidding this, and laws forbidding such freed slaves to return to the slave states on penalty arrest, punishment, and sale. Jackie Robinson, a baseball player, said, "I'm not concerned with your liking or disliking of me. All I ask is that you respect me as a human being." Wordsworth Donisthorpe, a philosopher, said, "Equality in slavery is not liberty." J.J. Dewey, an author, says, "He who seeks freedom at the expense of another is only building prison walls that will enslave him." George Wallace, an activist, said, "If nature has made anything a man's own, his mind and body are so. At least it is evident that whatever right one man has in his mind and body, another man must have the same right in his. That is, as far as we can judge from any appearance in nature, each man has an equal right in his own mind and body respectively. But no man's mind and body can be his own unless the faculties of both, that is, his judgment, his will, and his powers of acting are so. Now he who has a right in his faculties of judging, of choosing, and of acting is no slave. And since nature, which gave every man a right in his own mind and body, gave him a right likewise to these faculties, the consequence is that nature has not placed any man in a state of slavery." Larkin Rose, an author and screenwriter, says the reason that the belief in authority can drive people to commit evil, but in the end cannot limit the evil they commit, is simple. Aside from whatever technical limitations there are supposed to be on an agent of authority, the primary concept that the enforcer is taught, and the primary concept that he must accept in order to do his job, is that as a representative of authority, he is above the common folk and has the moral right to forcibly control them. In short, he is taught that his badge and his position make him the rightful master of all the average people. Once he is convinced of that lie, it should be expected that he will despise the average citizen and treat him with contempt, in the same way and for the same reason that a slave owner will treat his slaves not as human beings but as property, whose feelings and opinions matter no more than the feelings and opinions of the master's cattle or his furniture. It is very telling that many modern law enforcers quickly become angry, even violent, when an average citizen simply speaks to the officer as an equal, instead of assuming the tone and demeanor of a subjugated underling. Again, this reaction is precisely the same, and has the same cause, as the reaction a slave master would have to an uppity slave speaking to him as an equal. Etienne de la Boetie says it should not enter the mind of anyone that nature has placed some of us in slavery, since she has actually created us all in one likeness. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a philosopher, says one thinks himself the master of others, and yet he is a greater slave than they. Herbert Spencer, a psychologist and polymath, said, "The tyrant is nothing but a slave turned inside out." Sarah E. Holmes from the Liberty newspaper in 1847 said, "The slavery of each is my slavery." And finally, William Batchelder Greene, an abolitionist, said, "Equality is the condition that obtains in every society where no special or artificial privilege is granted to anyone or to any set of its members." So ask yourself, what then is equality in relation to freedom? If we all have the same moral rights and none of us has the right to commit violence upon another, does this have to do with being free or having order? What does it mean to say that we are free? We talked about what is slavery. We talked about the Stanley Milgram experiments and the Stanford prison experiments and what goes on in the mind of the slave. But even further, we need to understand what is freedom before we can start comparing and contrasting and going even deeper into the mindset of the slave. For if we are enslaved now, we need to understand what is freedom, that thing which we are seeking to attain, that thing which will heal us, that thing which will make us better than we ever were before, because it is our natural condition, as many of the abolitionists have said. So let us attain that natural, free condition that we are meant to be. Thank you for watching this part of the docu-series Slavery Gone for Good. Be sure to watch our other parts for a more deep understanding as to the nature of truth and action in its fullest extent. If you want to learn more and hear more quotes that have not been discussed in this video, be sure to buy the book Slavery Gone for Good Black Book Edition. This is the most important work in history, and you are part of that work. Do not forget it. As Frederick Douglass, former slave and abolitionist, said, "Knowledge makes a man unfit to be a slave."